It's Friday afternoon, and just ahead of getting in the car for a weekend away, I've dived into my stash and pulled out some yarn for my next pair of natural socks. I'm using a DK weight, undyed French wool yarn by Breton yarn company Bouclaine. I had such a great experience knitting my last pair of DK weight socks that I want to make another pair. I'll be using the same pattern as before, the basic sock pattern by Church Mouse Yarns, and I'll begin by casting on 48 stitches. Time to set up the magic loop. It's something I always find a little bit tricky as I learnt to make socks on DPNs, but I'm getting there with practice, and I really love making socks this way nowadays. Just time to start knitting on the cuff in 2x2 rib before we have to get in the car and leave for our weekend away. And we're off on our way to the eco-village for a weekend, an hour away from where we live. It's a couple of hours later. We've arrived at the eco-village, we've unpacked our bags, we've made our beds, we've had our tea, and now the children are tucked up in bed asleep. It's time for me to get my knitting out again as I sit by the wood burner, keeping my feet warm and waiting for the kettle to boil for a nice cup of tea. And my husband sat beside me, engrossed in the book I've just lent him, Craft by Alex Langens. check the water. C'est prêt? It's the next morning and my husband is going to be busy all day today with other members of the community learning how to do a particular type of basket weaving with rushes. And so I'm in charge of the children. My little boy has gone off to play with his friends and I'm sat in the common room with my little girl who's busy playing one of her favourite games while we're here, which is climbing over all the furniture and jumping off onto the floor. And I'm about to start work on my garter heel flap. I finished knitting the entire leg of the sock last night and I've decided for the first time ever to have a go at using garter stitch for a heel to see whether it's more resistant, more durable in the long run. I'll be excited to see how it knits up and most especially how it wears in the long run. It's after lunch now and I'm sat outside in the sun but with a very cold bottom watching my little girl play in the sandpit, and I've turned my heel and I've now picked up stitches for the instep. It's evening once again, we've had our meal, the children are in bed asleep and the evening is beginning with a power cut, the second of the day. So I'm very grateful to be in a house with wood stove. I'm sat in the kitchen for the start of the evening and I've decided to get my head torch out and keep on knitting at my sock in the light of the head torch. It's something I've done a lot in the past when we've been camping and it's actually a really pleasant way to knit. Particularly as at night time you get a really good focus on your hands so you can see your stitches really well. Not long after I finished recording this little segment, the power did come back on and we moved into the room you saw us sat in last night by the wood stove heater, and that is actually in the room used by our friends Béa Manu as their workroom for their alpaca wool work, which is why there's a floor loom in that room, amongst other equipment for doing handicrafts. Hello, how are you? It's Sunday morning, a few days after I released my last podcast, studio vlog, not quite sure what it is, and I'm filming this morning, not from my usual location. We've come away for the weekend to the eco-village that we've been interested in joining for the last couple of years, and that therefore we've been visiting for a couple of years. It's situated about an hour away from where we live, sort of further north into the plain, so it's not in the mountains at all, although we can see the mountains where we live from the village, which is rather nice. And we're here for the weekend. We've not been since the summer. We stayed here for 3 months over the summer, culminating in a 3-week stay in a yurt, whilst we were looking after the animals and the yurt and the garden of some of our friends here. But today we're staying in one of the family rooms. There's 4 family rooms in the eco-village for visitors. And yeah, we've not been in the autumn, and we're really happy to be here this weekend. We came specifically because my husband yesterday was taking part in a basket making workshop. So yeah, he had a go at a new kind of basket weaving with a new material to him. It's Jean, and he was quite tired last evening after spending all day concentrating, but yeah, he had a really pleasant time. So I, on the other hand, yesterday busy looking after mainly our little girl, because our little boy here is very autonomous and able to run around and play with his friends quite happily, but I need to be present with my little girl. And so I made sure before we left that I had a knitting project that would be easy transportable and easy for me to work on whilst we were here. And that project is another pair of socks. So I cast on Friday evening, or Friday afternoon, just before we left. And I've been knitting steadily since we left. And so far I've knitted a cuff, a garter flap heel. It's the first time I'm doing garter. You can't really see because of the colour of the yarn, but I thought I'd give that a try. I've done the instep, and now I'm just working on the foot. And I think this is going to be another sock for me, because at the moment I just want some socks for me. I'll start making some socks for the family soon, but just for now I want to spoil myself with warm feet. And yeah, it's the same pattern as my Rain Cloud and Sage pair of socks, which are currently on my feet, keeping me warm. It's the Church Mouse Classics basic sock. And as I said in my last podcast, it has a DK and a fingering weight version, and I just love these socks. They are steadily becoming my favourite sock pattern. I think the next pair I knit, I'd quite like to just experiment a little bit with some ribbing and try a 3x1 rib for the, is it the leg? So this I've done 2x2 ribbing on the top. But just for a bit of a change, I'd quite like to try a 3x1. So we'll see if I do. And the yarn I'm using is yarn from my stash. And it's some French yarn by a small breed specific company called Bouclaine. And this I bought when we were living in Brittany a couple of years ago. We lived in Brittany for nearly 2 years, a year and a half, and this company is based in Finistère, which is the absolute western department of Brittany, which was where we lived, surrounded on 3 sides by the sea. And I think this Ouessant, so this is the name of this yarn. I think this was their first original one, and it's using wool, 100% wool from sheep from the island of Ouessant. So, oh no, it doesn't have any more information. Ouessant is one of the inhabited islands to the west out in the Atlantic that you reach from Brest, which is, pardon me, which is the capital of Finistère. And it's, so you may have heard of Ouessant because there's a breed of sheep called the Ouessant sheep, or I think in English we sometimes say Ushant. And they are tiny, absolutely tiny sheep. They're very common in Brittany now, but also further afield as kind of garden sheep. You often find people with 2 or 3 ram sheep in their gardens, if they've got big gardens, to keep the grass down. But the sheep that you find on the continent are very different from the sheep you now find today on the island. So these sheep, these tiny sheep, originate from the island, and they traditionally were black. They're a sort of a rustic, primitive breed, and they mainly are black, or they are only black, I think, originally. And the women, or the people, the islanders, their clothes were black, so they used their wool to spin and to make into clothes. And there's, I think, a very particular style of spinning. There's a specific spindle that originates from that island. But at some point, I think in the 19th century, other sheep breeds from the continent were imported over to the island and used to breed the original Ouessant sheep in order to improve the breed, not for their wool but for their meat, because as meat sheep they're not considered very interesting, the tiny sheep, because they're just so small. And even in terms of wool, I had the opportunity when we lived in Brittany. There was a local heritage breed farm, kind of a visitor centre. So they had all different rare breeds from all over Brittany of of sheep, of cows, of pigs, horses, goats, chickens, all different animals that you traditionally find in Breton farms. And they had, of course, a flock of Ouessant sheep, so they had the tiny ones, and I had the opportunity to attend a shearing there, and I was very kindly given a Ouessant fleece by the farmer, and I spun that whole fleece into a singles yarn, and I made it into the shawl that I wore on my wedding day. And that whole project, from shearing to wedding day, took a month, and that was how long we were engaged, or how long it was from when we decided to get married to when we actually got married. And I talk about that shawl, as far as I remember, in my very first podcast episode, which if you haven't seen, if you go right back to the beginning on my YouTube channel, you should be able to see it. And I think I even included some footage of the shearing, or no, it wasn't of the shearing, when I went back a month later and showed the shepherd the shawl I'd knitted, and he let me hold the sheep. He'd given me the wool. It was a little baby ewe. I think she was 18 months old, and so it was her first time being sheared. And she was white, or kind of a lovely beige colour, because there are some now white Ouessants. But yeah, going back to this wool, the sheep now found on Wesson are very different. So this is not written as laine d'Ouessant, it's mouton de l'île d'Ouessant, so sheep from the island of Wesson. So there's a little difference. Anyway, this is a lovely breed specific yarn. It's been started by a young woman and her mum. And since they set up their company a few years ago, they now also have dyed yarns in their range as well, and I think a few different fibres, but all of which are sourced locally in Brittany and around Brittany and then spun in France. So this yarn, these actual skeins of yarn, I bought at our local farmers market shop, which we used to go twice a week to do our shopping, and they also sold the yarn, which was really difficult for me to see every week, because I was always quite tempted to buy some wool when I went to get my bread and my vegetables, but I held back. I was quite good. I think I only bought wool 3 times from there in the time we lived there. So yeah, I bought this yarn originally to make a pattern that the creator of the yarn had designed, which was a traditional, which was based on a traditional kind of slipper pattern on the Wesson Island that the women and men would wear in their wooden clogs. And the idea was that you knitted a sample, you felted the sample in the machine on purpose, so then you could work out how much shrinkage there was, and based on your gauge, and then you would knit the slipper much bigger based on your gauge. I had to do quite a lot of maths, which is why in the end I never got around to knitting the pattern, because I'm just not very good at that kind of stuff. But I think if I sat down now and really took my time, I'd probably be able to manage it. But I just came across this yarn the other day when I was going through my stash, and I just thought, oh yeah, this is going to be my next pair of socks. So it's a 3-ply yarn, DK weight, and it's this lovely brown colour. It's being called gris, so grey, in the ball, gris naturel, but for me it's a lovely dark brown, so it kind of captures that natural, very dark fleece that even the sheep today on the island have retained. And so for a 100-gram ball, so this is a 100-gram ball, and there's 130 meters per 50 grams. So I've got more than enough to make a pair of socks, and probably will have enough to make, I don't know, I don't think I'll get 2 out of 1 ball, because I decided to make the cuff a little bit longer this time than my last pair, but I'll definitely have enough left over to make the start of a second pair of socks, which maybe I'll combine with another yarn by them, or yeah, I'll see. I haven't quite decided yet. But anyway, as you can see, it's knitting up really quickly, as is the joy of this pattern. And yeah, I'm just excited to continue working on natural socks. So I think I'll get back to my knitting now. And oh, I did just want to say, I just grabbed my handspun yarn. So I brought my handspun with me to show our friends Beatrice and Manu. So the family whose yurt we stayed in over the summer, they are alpaca farmers, and they have a flock or herd of I think about 20 alpacas, various colours, and they get their alpaca fibre spun in a mini mill near to Bordeaux, and they sell their alpaca yarn, and they also make different products with the alpaca fibres. So they felt by hand, they spin, they knit, they machine knit, they hand knit various items, and they also make marmites norvégiennes, which are like kind of a Norwegian oven, I think, or like a Dutch oven, so it's to keep your pots hot while they're cooking, so you don't need to have them on the gas or on the electric. So in some of the earlier footage you'll see me sat knitting by the wood stove in the evening, and we're actually in their workroom, which is in the house, in the room downstairs in the bedroom in the house where I'm staying in. So anyway, I bought my yarn just to show them. It's got all in a tangle in my bag. This is the yarn I showed you in the last episode, and since I showed you, it's been balled up, and I did the other day cast on a kind of a gauge watch for a pair of socks by Ozetta, which I think are called the camp socks, which are knit with a worsted weight yarn. But I'm not sort of entirely happy with my finished yarn for finish or for a sock project. It really is much thicker than I intended it to be, as I did talk about in my last episode. Which is fine, but it just means I don't really have enough yardage, I think, for a pair of socks. And although I did try initially to work the white and the grey together, just for me, I just don't really want them striped. I'm just not really into striped socks just at the moment. So the other problem I have is this Exmoor horn is very rough and kind of dry, whereas the Jacob has turned out very sort of silky and smooth, and I can just really see this becoming a pair of fingerless mittens. I've got a pattern in mind, which are the Sweet Fern mittens by Clara Parkes in her book, The Knitter's Book of Wool, and I think I've got enough to knit those. So I'd love to see what a worsted spun yarn looks like in a cable design, which is why I'd like to use that for this. So I think for finish, these two balls are not going to become socks, but I'm really pleased to have sort of got my spinning back started again, and thanks to these balls of yarn. I did also apply a first 50 gram skein of the Herdwick. Oh, maybe I had already shown you actually, sorry, I think I'd already shown you, but anyway, here it is. I haven't yet spun the singles for the second 50 grams. But I could see these two going together. They're a bit more, just the yarn quality just feels more natural to put them together. But again, I think perhaps what I'm going to have to do is, as I've only got 100 grams of each breed specific wool left in my stash, is to be really careful about the yardage for a future pair of socks. So I think I may, if I continue working with the comb top, have to try and spin a fingering weight yarn, which I'm capable of doing. I just didn't really fancy making a fingering weight yarn at the moment, but or I could combine two together where the colours, the grey and the white, sort of match better, and then ply them together from mild yarn. So I haven't quite decided yet. The other thing as well is sort of working with this yarn again is, it just reminds me how much I really prefer woolen spun yarn. I just love the feel of it in my hands. I love the finished texture as I'm knitting. It's just so airy and kind of fluffy and soft. And this, it just, yeah, it's just so smooth, and obviously it's very even, and that's, you know, for a spun skein of yarn, I'm really pleased with it. I'm just not very familiar knitting with worsted spun yarns, so you know, it's good because it sort of is perhaps pushing me out of my comfort zone as a spinner and a knitter, which, you know, is all good because it's all learning. But yeah, I think my next spin that I'd like to start next week, because we'll be going back this afternoon, I may pull out some carded bats which I have in my stash, my fibre stash. I actually have some Wesson bat from when we lived in Brittany. I think I have 3 fleeces worth, so there's about 500 grams I think of wool. So I think I have a white, a dark grey like this, and then a sort of a lighter grey somewhere between this and this, or maybe a brown, I can't quite remember. So I may spin with that and really try and get a 2-ply DK weight, because that's really what I want to knit at the moment. Or I may just try and persevere with my worsted draw, spinning with a 100 gram top, but aim for a much finer yarn, so we shall see. But anyway, I'm just still really enjoying this sock project. Thank you as well to everyone for your wonderful feedback on my last episode. It's just really great to see your interest in my work, and then my thoughts on wool and on spinning and knitting, and I'm really excited as well to see that I'm perhaps inspiring some of you to get your spindles or get your spinning wheels out again. So yeah, I was even sort of thinking perhaps maybe in the spring, if you'd be interested, perhaps we could run our own sort of informal spin along, something I've done in the past, and I've really enjoyed hosting that in the past. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, let me know below. And yeah, I can have a think about what form that could take. You know, in the past I've very much tried to make it open to beginners, because that's just really important to me, is to help folk discover spinning, because I love it, and I'd love to spread that joy around. So yeah, if that's something that you'd be interested in, and specifically if you have never spun before but would maybe like to have a go on the spindle, we could make it a spindle along, and I do have the intention in the future to share some kind of tutorials or some sort of this is how I spin, to help get folks started on the spindle and on the wheel. So again, if that's something that you'd be interested in, let me know below, and if you have any specific questions that you'd like to know, let me know. But I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to continue knitting on my socks, and hopefully after this chatty bit you'll see the last few stages of getting these socks finished, or this sock finished. I maybe won't film me knitting the second sock. Anyway, keep safe, keep warm and cozy, keep knitting and spinning, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon. Take care, bye bye. Hello again, and it's Sunday afternoon, and I have a finished sock. Yay! All done, all cast off, all woven in, all ready for sock number 2. And I'll just quickly show you the little, it's kind of a basket, not really sure what it is, but this is what my husband made yesterday on his little course. So they were learning a particular style of kind of weaving, I suppose, a lot of plaiting, and he made this for my little boy. It's a quiver for his arrows, for his bow and arrows, and yeah, we're gonna just learn how to we're gonna just start practicing ourselves at home with this style of weaving. So very productive weekend. We're just about to leave to go back home, So I've already cast on sock number 2, and I imagine by the time I get home I'll have knitted about that much, because home is an hour away for us. So yeah, see you again soon. Bye.